Welcome to a podcast on CRESS, the Consistent Regular English Spelling System. This podcast is simply about how to use the CRESS alphabet. It shows how simple CRESS is, how quickly it's learned, how it makes sense, how it corresponds to pronunciation. CRESS is really very simple, and that will be evident as we go through this podcast. There's an important contrast at hand. We contrast CRESS, which is the Consistent Regular English Spelling System, with SSSS, our joking way of referring to traditional English as the Senseless Spelling Sabotaging Society, an existing system of traditional spelling which makes no sense. In this podcast, we're going to show you how to write any word simply, consistently, without confusion, in a perfectly regular fashion. Everything is simple and straightforward, easily learned. In CRESS, most of the English letters are used in the same basic way as in traditional English. There's nothing different to learn. These letters transfer from traditional English to CRESS. P, B, T, D, K, G as in go, F, V, S, Z, H, M, N, Y, W. Some letters of the alphabet, the traditional alphabet, are not even necessary. C, J, Q, and X are not used in CRESS unless advanced learners use them for an advanced adaptation. CRESS has no confusing digraphs to worry about. A sound is a letter, and a letter is a sound. There's no PH, two letters for the one sound, F as in phone. No TI for sh, as in the TI in ignition. No EA as in read versus read, or lead versus led. Those confusions gone. No OO as in foot versus food, good versus mood. So forth and so on. All of these digraphs become obsolete. CRESS is built on linguistic science. The alphabet provides basic positions of the articulator, of the tongue, etc. Imagine an X-ray of a speaker looking at the left side of his or her head. Just imagine a head where you can see the tongue inside of it. Think about the tongue point of pronunciation. For every sound, the tongue goes to a certain place. That's basically the scientific basis of CRESS. Vowels are written similar to and transparent to traditional English. But you have to think just a little bit differently. The letter I is now stands only for the sound I as in bit. The tongue is high front. Imagine the tongue in that X-ray. The letter E is now only the sound eh. The tongue is low front in that diagram. The letter U is the sound as in book. The tongue is high back. The letter O is the first sound in the or sound, or, which is a low back sound. And just one more, the letter A is now the sound ah. The tongue is low center. So we maintain the 5 basic vowels, and they just have very clear pronunciations associated with them. The I is I as in bit. The letter E is E as in bet. The letter U is U as in put. The letter O is O as in or. The letter A is A as in pot. So that is very simple. But I'm sure you will be thinking, there are more sounds. There are more sounds than that in English. Well, the wonderful thing about CRESS is all the other sounds are just adjustments to the basic sound. Once you know those 5, it's easy to understand that each of those has close neighbors. In other words, the tongue is not in the same position, but it isn't far away. They're close neighbors. Here are some neighbor vowels. Yes, you say I as in bit. What about the sound E as in beat? Well, quite simply, to go from I as in bit, just raise the tongue a little bit from I to E. We represent this by using an up arrow after the letter I. After the I, you just show an up arrow. Why an up arrow? Well, you're looking at the face, at the human head from the left side. Imagine that picture. You can see the tongue. Well, the tongue is getting raised, therefore an up arrow. The logic is as simple as that, and it's consistent. Now consider as in look. Someone might say, what about the as in Luke? Same point. The tongue is raised a bit. So add an up arrow after the You put the up arrow there. It tells us that we're talking about raising the tongue a bit. So that's oo. Raised a bit is oo. There are more phonetic details in phonetic science, but these generalities do hold true, and it's a great beginning and introduction to the linguistic science. Continuing on, the letter E is the E as in bet, but what about bait? Well, no surprise, because English is systematic. The tongue again is raised a bit, so add an up arrow. You take the letter E for you add the up arrow after it, and you get A. Continuing on, the first sound in aw. We know how to write that. You just write a letter O. But what about boat? Sound is a little bit different. Again, the tongue is just raised a bit. So add an up arrow, O to O. So now you see that we've developed a consistent pattern here. You just use the up arrow when you raise the tongue. This even extends to the letter A as in pot. If you want to represent the A as in pot, you just write the letter A. But what about put? Well, again, the tongue is raised a bit, so add an up arrow. All 5 cases. We just learn one simple thing. Use an arrow when the vowel's a little bit higher in the mouth, the tongue's a little bit higher, and you have a symbol for it. It's so very simple. Just add up arrow after any neighbor sound that raises the tongue. Now, this is an advanced note. We'll just mention it in passing. All these arrows can be streamlined in an advanced use, using H or double letters different ways. But the point here is that it is not advisable for initial learning of the phonetic principle and phonemic awareness to consider any little adjustments you'd want to the CRESS system, because the whole point is that as the child learns the alphabet and how to write sounds, it's also becoming aware of what the tongue is doing. So that is phonemic awareness. That is also the beginning of teaching some science to your 5-year-old. This is an important point. Well, that's a good foundation for how we do things in CRESS. But consider also that if the neighbor sound is fronted, if you look at that X-ray from the left-hand side of the head, and you see the tongue moves a little farther forward, we have the left arrow. So now say the ahs, the ahs in pot, the ahs in pot, and you might ask yourself, what about pat? That's a different sound. Well, the fact of the matter is, to get from ah to ah, you front the tongue. So that's where we place a left arrow after the A sound to represent ah. So this case is a little bit different, but notice it's the same principle, and the whole system hangs together very well. This adheres to science and is consistent with simple practical adjustments. In learning to read and write, phonetic basics and the phonemic principle are built in, and they coincide, and they're held together, and they make sense. No more worry about phonemic awareness and reading theory. You're killing two birds with one stone. As you teach one, you teach the other. Well, those are the vowels of English. What about the consonants? Well, our comment on that question would be, consonants have neighbors too, and the same system handles them consistently. Yes, consistency is what we want to offer the child and other learners. So we have the S as in sin, just like standard English. But what about thin? Well, we're not proposing you use a TH. We're proposing that you ask yourself and show the child that if you take the tongue tip saying sin, S-I-N, and you just force that, you push that tongue tip forward until it's between the teeth, guess what you get? You get th as in thin. So when we write the S in CRESS, we just write when we write the th sound in CRESS, we just write the S sound as in sin. But we put a left arrow after it to show that there is fronting. Put the tongue forward. Now, are we inventing something new every time we see a case? No, because the system is a single system. It's consistent and regular. Consider the first sound in zen, zero, zen. Somebody might say, well, but what about then? You don't have a system for representing the as in then. But we simply point out that if you do the same thing again, if you say your zzz, but then you push the tongue forward until the tip is between the teeth, you get the. So to write the sound, we write the Z sound with the left arrow, simply saying this is like a Z except the tongue tip is moved forward. Well, just to show you that there's some interesting theory behind all this, just think to yourself how a language like French that doesn't have a th, theta or an eth as we call it in linguistics, a th or a the, how do those folks say th and the at the point before which they've learned to pronounce as it is in English with the and the? Well, the French speaker just beginning is likely, instead of thin, to say sin. The cracker is very thin, sin. And instead of saying then, they're able to say and zen. So you see, this system is making sense. There is a scientific basis. And there's a reason why it's really worth teaching this to children. It coheres in a single system, as science should and does. Well, continuing on, even with the same sound, S as in sin, someone might ask, well, what about the sh as in shin? Well, yes, the tongue changes shape a little bit, but also get children, have people go sh, sh. They should very quickly be able to feel in their own mouths that the S moves backwards to get to sh. We simply ignore any little changes in tongue shape. But the tongue goes backwards. So to write a sh sound, any student could probably guess by now that you're going to write an S with a back arrow, an arrow pointing to the right, because we always look at the head from the left side. And it's similar with this sound z in rouge. What about writing rouge? You might have a way to write rouge, but what if you want to write rouge? It's different. Well, do the same experiment, and you will get the same result. The tongue tip is pulled back a bit. So to write the j in rouge, you just write the z as in rouge, but you use a back arrow to show, in fact, that the tongue, the place of articulation, is further back in the mouth. Scientific x-rays of articulation demonstrate this. So we're on good ground here. Well, continuing to another case that's a little bit different. If you take the N in sin, someone might say, yeah, but how do you represent the last sound in sing? Well, first of all, it's not two sounds as we write in traditional English. It's one sound, the ang sound, sing. Well, once again, if you look at an x-ray, it is a little bit different because you use the back of the tongue, whereas all the previous examples we've given use the tip of the tongue, use the back of the tongue. But it is nevertheless true that the tongue is further back. And in case you're wondering, all of this isn't just articulatory science, but also acoustic science. Because notice when you move the point of articulation back, when the tongue goes further back, for those of you that know physics and acoustics, the resonating chamber in front is longer. Well, I'm sure that's boring to many of you, but it reinforces the scientific point. So to write an ang sound, you just write an N with a back arrow. Well, this covers the basic consonants. These arrows can also be streamlined for advanced use, but we don't propose that in initial learning. The phonetic phoneme principle must be learned clearly and without complication. Excuse me. Next, we consider briefly that three vowel combinations are easily handled. If you pay attention to how you say the I and my, you'll after a while, after a short bit of consideration, you'll find that the tongue goes from ah to e. I goes quickly, so you won't hear it at first, but slow down and you will hear it. So we write I as an AI. Same thing for the vowel in boy. Boy. If you say it quickly, you might not be aware, but slow down and you'll find yourself going from O to E. Boy, 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 oi. So just write that OI. Same point for AU as an out. The sound in out. Out. There's no O involved there. That's the confusion of English spelling. Ah, oo, out, 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 like that. So the whole system is simple, it's regular, it hangs together, it's coherent. It will not confuse anybody. It involves some teaching that is really pretty fun for children and for the teachers. And it launches children better toward a scientific basis for their future education. And not just science, but the world should make sense. This does not make sense. This does make sense. Traditional spelling does not make sense. So it has all that to recommend it. In summary, the simple and basic system and simple subsystems of CRESS are easy to learn. They make sense. They are regular and consistent. They have no negative or wasteful or discouraging learning effects. Thank you for listening to this podcast on how to use the alphabet in the CRESS system. If you're interested in exploring CRESS further, go to www.sssss.org disruptenglish.com, all one word, Disrupt English. And you'll find podcasts on the rationale behind CRESS, a little bit of discussion for teachers and educators, a podcast on system design, and other things that you can read or listen to. So thank you for listening. www.disruptenglish.com.